Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. It is my real pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion in our 20th annual conference. You will note that we are live streaming the whole event on the BIS public website and also recording it for viewing later. The topic of the panel today is Women in Central Banking. Many efforts are underway at central banks worldwide to improve gender diversity. Yet much remains to be done in what has traditionally been a male-dominated sector. The pandemic has highlighted the need for further action as it has adversely affected women in particular. I am therefore very pleased to host this panel discussing the current state of affairs and how to enhance ongoing diversity initiatives in central banks. We have a stellar panel. We have three panelists to discuss this topic. Andréa Maechler, member of the governing board of the Swiss National Bank, nor Shamsiah Mohd Yunus, governor of the Central Bank of Malaysia, and Claudia Buch, Vice President of the Deutsche Bundesbank. The panel will be moderated by Cecilia Skingsley, First Deputy Governor of Sveriges Riksbank. I'm very much looking forward to what for sure will be a very exciting panel, including also to do some lessons on how to enhance our efforts here at the BIS in improving gender diversity. So let me give the floor now to Cecilia, who will introduce the panel in more detail and kick off the discussion. Please, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Augustin, and welcome to Stockholm. As a university student, I took a number of courses in political science, and a professor there who was an expert in power structures gave me a valuable advice. He said to me, Cecilia, if you really want to know where the real power in society is, look at the institutions where the top management does not have any women. At the time, I thought that was rather a dark and cynical view of the world, but I have found that looking through the world with that lens has been interesting and useful. Luckily, this was more than 30 years ago, and the world has changed. It's fair to say that power has become a bit more of an elusive feature. It's more liquid, but it's certainly also the case that women has made a number of coming out out in the forefront, which is very good. And I'm very pleased that BIS decided to choose this as a panel, and I am surrounded by some extraordinary colleagues that we are going to discuss the subject of women in central banking. As we prepare this panel, I think it's fair to say that the panelists and I share three common views. The first one is that research clearly indicates that diverse groups eliminate features like myopia and group thinking. The second one is that diversity is more than about gender, but gender is certainly a very important part of it. And thirdly, since diversification improves decision-making, everybody in society will gain from it. This panel will now be arranged in the following way. Each panelist will make an introduction. We will start with Deputy Governor or Vice President Claudia Buch from the Bundesbank, followed by Governor Shamsiah Yunus from the Central Bank of Malaysia, and then Andréa Maechler, member of the governing board at the Swiss National Bank. We will then discuss some issues before taking questions from you at the audience. And we will start with the most timely one, namely the pandemic. What risks have occurred, but also possibilities that should be addressed from our recent experiences. And we will also discuss something that I'd like to call the real elephant in the room when it comes to women in central banking. But I will outline the detail of that question when we get there. So, as they say, stay tuned. Now, it's my great privilege to introduce to you Vice President Claudia Buch at the Bundesbank. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Cecilia, and thank you very much, Augustin and the BIS for putting together this panel on a very, I think, important topic, and I'll explain in a second why I think it's important. So as has been said, women are underrepresented in central banking, not necessarily in terms of employment, but in terms of the female leadership share. So if we look at this whole issue, I think we have to notice that overall in society, women have made great headway. Claudia Golden, a very important influential researcher on this topic, calls this the grand gender convergence. So gaps along many indicators have narrowed, so we shouldn't underestimate the progress that has been made. But women still overall face different lifetime patterns of employment, wages, and as I said, leadership roles. And this grand gender convergence, you can also observe a bit in the numbers in the Bundesbank. So just to put this issue into perspective a bit, in terms of total employment, we have increased the female share from 40% to 44% over the past decade, so between 2010 and 2020. So that's a 4 percentage point increase. And in terms of the women in leadership position, it's even bigger. It's from 19% in 2010 to 30%, or a little bit below 30% now. So there's still, if you want to call this a leadership gap, but we've also made a lot of progress. And so why do we observe differences? Why is it that women are often underrepresented in leadership positions? So one is, I think it's preferences. It's just reflecting a little bit what we also see in society as such, that women are often underrepresented in economics and finance. We know from a lot of financial literacy surveys that women sometimes underestimate their capacity to deal with financial issues. So we certainly see this being reflected also in central banks. But then, of course, we know that we don't only hire economists. So many interesting things that need to be done at central banks, and it's not just economists who are attracted to these positions. So preferences certainly play a role, path dependencies play a role. It takes time to develop leadership potential. And we may also have some institutional constraints that we can relax, for instance, in the way we organize competition and in our organizations. Before going into that, what we're actually doing to reduce, if you want to call it, this leadership gap, let me just spend a few minutes talking about why does it matter. So why should we, in the first place, close the gap? And I think, first of all, of course, it's important what Cecilia said, that it's not just about gender diversity, but we have many other diversity issues. So maybe we come to that also. And I think generally, as important members of societies, it's important that we reduce discrimination, that we reduce implicit bias in decision makings. And it's really interesting to see what also the empirical evidence tells us on this, because the gender wage gap per se cannot necessarily be taken as evidence for discrimination. But there's, again, apologies for citing Claudia Golden again, but she's really one of the leading researchers in this field. She also shows that it's not necessary that men and women are paid differently, but they work differently. They work at different hours. The labor market incentivizes them to work at different hours, and hours worked have a different price or different value at specific times. So giving more flexibility, in other words, to women can help. And I think we need a lot more diversity of thought. So central banks, like other institutions in our societies, are really challenged by digitalization, by new developments. And I think we have to make sure that we bring the best people to the decision-making process and also develop new ways of thinking. And that really needs diversity. So what do we do at the Bundesbank? I've shown you the improvements we've made, but also there's more way to go. So we really use active strategies to improve gender diversity. So we have top-down targets. They're not necessarily called quotas, but they're similar. And we really communicate to the organization what we want to achieve. So we have an equal opportunity plan. We have regular reporting to the board and an evaluation of the measures taken. And we also see that it pays off, that incentivizes also women to apply to positions. And then beyond this overall objectives, targets, we take very specific measures that help us achieving this objective. So seminars that reduce implicit bias, mentoring programs. We have assigned now clear responsibility at the managerial level so that managers are also required to observe diversity and to work towards the targets. We have childcare facilities. We've tried to change the nature of competition. So it's a whole bundle of initiatives that we take. And I think what's important, and maybe that also brings us to the discussion about what are the effects of the pandemic, what follows from the increasing working from home, is it good or bad for women? I think it's really important that beyond these overall targets, we also very carefully evaluate what we are doing, because we have to, any policy or any initiatives that we are taking can have reach the intended objectives, but can also have negative side effects. And we have to make sure that we understand how the programs are working. And I think we can, as analytical institutions that we all are in central banks, I think we can maybe do even more to compare notes and to really put together good databases, good analytical frameworks to really assess these diversity policies. Let me stop here and I look forward to the further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Excellent introduction. And in case you have just turned into this program, you are attending the BIS annual conference, where we are right now having a panel discussing women in central banking. And I'm Cecilia Skingsley, your moderator for today. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our second panelist, Governor Noor Shamsiah Yunus from the Central Bank of Malaysia. Shamsiah, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, Cecilia, Claudia, and Andrea, and the BIS community here today. So I'm going to share my remarks. I'm going to share the experiences that we have here in Bank of Malaysia, and I will start with our core values. So one of our core values in the bank is diversity, and we strive to uphold this by creating an environment where everyone matters. And one of the values that we have in the bank is what we call respect for diversity. So we try to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to contribute and make a difference. We don't have a targeted talent strategy for gender diversity. Our ethos has always emphasized merit and equal opportunities, regardless of gender. So this has settled to a balanced representation of women and men across the bank. For example, at our supervisory board, women account for 40% of board members, and our total workforce is a 50-50 representation of men and women. Women account for 44% of senior officers, that is from the deputy department head to the governor. But we see a tapering where women represent 29% of heads of department. But when we drill down to the departments in monetary and financial stability, this 29% rises to about 42%. We also find that women executive represent 58% of professionals in these core policy departments. And for Bank Negara Malaysia, 40% of our first level, our new hires come from undergraduate scholarship programs. And of this, about 54% currently are women. So while women may appear overrepresented in some areas and underrepresented in others, we are quite fortunate to have a generally good balance overall. We also count ourselves lucky that given our gender makeup, we never had to contemplate affirmative action policies for our female staff. Our HR policies are gender neutral, and we don't have pay scales that are gender biased. Men and women to perform comparable jobs are paid equitably based on merit. So for us here in the bank, In developing career tracks of the staff, we ensure that exposure is given to everyone to develop regardless of gender by getting involved in cross-sectoral bank-wide projects through secondments or representing the bank in international meetings or events. So there is no shortage of good female candidates, and our applicants for our advertised vacancies or promotions, in fact, women make up about 51% of our identified pipeline for senior roles today. And this succession pipeline is not based on an algorithm that targets gender, but it is on demonstrated performance, technical competencies, and the desired leadership attributes. Many women also choose to build long-term careers with us, knowing that the bank invests in its people. In fact, 60% of our staff on postgraduate studies at the moment are women. We do provide modest allowances so that our staff, whether it's men or women, they do not need to leave their young families behind in Malaysia when studying abroad. While we seek to remove any obstacles or discriminatory practices, women also need to feel safe at work, and we have a zero tolerance policy for harassment. Although it has been our policy to encourage an environment for women to come forward on any misconduct or harassment that they encounter, we are taking further steps. So earlier this year, we established a dedicated ethics and integrity office to advocate and uphold the highest standards of ethical and fair conduct in line with our cultural beliefs. I also want to say that for us, diversity, like what you had said, Cecilia, goes beyond gender. After all, central banking is a knowledge business. So diversity of perspectives, ideas, and ways of solving problems is key. We strive to reduce groupthink and unconscious bias, as we know that insufficient challenge and poor risk assessment can lead to black swans and blind spots in our policy formulation and decision making. And we do this by repeatedly reminding our teams to collaborate and to have the courage to challenge and to speak up. What I also see as being effective is being more deliberate in diversifying our talent pipeline to make sure that not too many of our staff come from the same educational backgrounds or have similar professional experiences. This also includes to be open-minded about sourcing talent from sources with backgrounds which are not traditional to central banking. Here in the bank, not only do we have quite a number of engineers, but we also have those who have studied geology and architecture as a part of our family here in the bank. So although the numbers reveal that we are doing okay, we are also conscious that the family and career conflict is real, and the casualties are bright, talented women who leave the workforce in their prime or are stretched juggling work. To illustrate, the female participation in the Malaysian labour force is about 55%, and it peaks around the 25 to 29 age bracket, and then it progressively drops to family care responsibilities. And reflecting societal and cultural expectation, the disproportionate responsibility that women take on in caring for their families triggers them to leave the workforce in their prime or are reluctant to move up faster the career ladder. So this, what I call the leaky talent pipeline, results in limited visibility of women for senior positions when the time and opportunities arise. So, like I said, fortunately, here in the bank, negara, women are represented across all age groups, and they tend to stay with us even when the task of raising their young families are at its peak. And women in the 25 to 35 age bracket account for about 50% of our workforce. And that's not much different from the 49% of those in the 36 to 45 age bracket. This is probably the result of many factors, but more importantly, I believe that is the result of our long-standing efforts to ensure that women need not face the binary choice of caring for their children or leaving the workforce. And this has helped to sustain our diverse talent pipeline. And speaking from experience, it was the support from my family in my early career, in the early years of my career in the bank that has helped, and having supportive supervisors. So for me, I didn't feel that I had to make this binary choice. But unfortunately, they may not be true for all women, and that's why over the years we have been very deliberate to address this conflict. In 2010, we opened up a professionally run and subsidized childcare facility near our headquarters that can accommodate nearly 400 children, so that the parents can have the peace of mind knowing that as they work, their children are also well cared. We also provide good maternity and medical benefits, and the medical coverage will also be provided to their children. So one of the few things that I introduced in the area of HR when I assumed the position of governor was to move the organization towards flexible working arrangements. And before the pandemic, this will include flexible hours, which enable parents to attend to their children in the mornings or or evenings. Of course, there is even more flexibility in this post-pandemic world, which I hope we can make permanent even after COVID is gone. So what we hope is that this flexibility will allow any working parent to design a schedule or arrangement that best meets their situation. This is not just for women, as increasingly men are sharing domestic responsibilities, are voicing their need for flexibilities in the work schedules too. And an area that we can do better in the bank is our paid paternity leave. In Malaysia, unfortunately, paternity leave is not enshrined in law, unlike maternity leave. And although many employers have internal policy for this, we are also taking steps to enhance our existing paternity leave policy. Finally, I find that women in the bank have always been formidable role models. And women have mentored many other women and mentored many of their male colleagues too. So there has been no gender distinction on who one chooses to coach and mentor. In my career, I had both men and women who mentored me and who gave me confidence to step up and take up challenges, gave me feedback and good advice. So it is also natural for me to also mentor my colleagues, both women and men, and it gives me great satisfaction to see them thrive in their careers based on merit and capabilities. So let me pause here.
Thank you, Shamsiah, and thank you for introducing this concept of the what's called the leaking pipeline. The fact that we seem to be losing a lot of talented women along the way in their working years. I'm now gonna turn to, last but not least, my dear colleague at the Swiss National Bank, board member Andréa Maechler. Andréa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Augustin, for organizing this. Good morning, Claudia, and good evening, Shamsiah. It's a real pleasure to be here on this panel today, and I'll be picking up on a number of issues that we have already heard in the introductory remarks. So let me give a little bit of the insights from the SNB perspective. So the SNB is fully committed to diversity within the SNB. Diversity has long been and continues to be a key ingredient to make sure we can fulfill our mandate. For us too, diversity is not only about gender. In fact, for instance, diversity is also about culture or affinity. In Switzerland, we have 4 official linguistic regions. We have French, we have German, Italian, and Rhéto-Romanche. Each region has its own specific norms and sensitivities, As a national institution, it is very important that this diversity is captured in our workforce and also in the way we communicate with our stakeholders. Diversity reduces the risk of groupthink. We have heard about this, and we can come back to that. Perhaps the newest element in diversity is how diversity can help us attract and retain the right staff. In Switzerland, the war for talent is a reality in a number of segments that are relevant for central banking, IT, cyber risk, just to mention a few. And those are really very real. And as a central bank, we feel we have the relevance, we have the purpose that the new generation is looking for. Do we have the branding is the real question. Graduates always more are known to seek diverse organization because they associate them with innovation, creativity, and stimulation. And I think this is where, for us, it's very important to be able to tap also in this pool. So now let me turn to gender diversity. Where do we stand at the SNB? Overall, 1 in 3 employees is a woman at the SNB, but there are large differences across the institution. For instance, in the economic segment, we have reached gender parity, and even in the lower to middle management level. In other areas, such as asset management, IT, operational banking, there the number of women, the share of women is clearly lower. And in the very senior position, the share of women has also been rising to 18% as compared to 13% just a decade ago. So clearly, we have been making good headway, but there is also still room for improvement here. Last year, we had a wake-up call with the media reports that made allegation of bullying, discrimination, and sexism at the SNB. The governing board took these allegations very seriously and reacted clearly. Such behavior is not tolerated at the SNB. It is in stark violation with our charter and code of conduct. We did not stop here. We called for an in-depth internal review looking at all the cases that were reported and identified. We did not find any indication of a systemic pattern of bullying, discrimination, of sexism based on the number of cases, based on the nature of the cases, the severity, but also on the lack of pattern in the type of cases that were reported. Nonetheless, we have decided to go much further. And in particular, we commissioned an in-depth, a comprehensive review of our internal processes, in particular HR processes and leadership processes. For us, it is very important that our internal processes are state-of-the-art, that they guarantee equal opportunity, and also ensure that there is no discrimination in any part of the bank. Now, what are some of the other challenges going forward that we can see? Some, and we've already heard this, are societal. Some can be institutional, and all of them seem to be self-reinforcing. So let me just point out 4 challenges. One for Switzerland is there are still very few women in top positions in Switzerland. Here, Switzerland is lagging behind, and this is particularly true in the private sector. We are faring, the picture looks a little bit brighter in the public sector, where there's been a rise, a marked increase in female parliamentarian, for instance, and also a rise in women in senior position in the public sector institutions. But this is a challenge nonetheless. Another important challenge is what we call the part-time trap for women. In Switzerland, the share of women working part-time is very high by international comparison. To give you a sense, the 59% of women work part-time, as compared to 13% men. And this gap widens even though if you take into account children. For instance, there are 78% of mothers work part-time as compared to 12% fathers. In a world in which full-time positions are the norm for upper management level, this part-time trap can really be an important barrier for women's career. Third, there is, and I don't need to say much, I'm sure we'll come back to it, we have the similar issue of a thin and leaky pipeline for women. Fewer graduates, they tend to get promoted more slowly and when they reach mid-career, and often they may even exit the workforce. The last challenge I want to raise is one that is more institutional, and it's the low staff turnover that we have at the SNB. Of course, this is also a positive sign because it reflects the very good and supportive working environment that we offer here at the SNB. But it is true that institution with a low turnover, it also means very few windows of opportunities for both men and women. But that means that any progress towards greater diversity within the institution will be very slow to be visible. So what does it mean for us? Where do we stand? What are the actions we've been taking? So first, what is very clear to us is the voice from the top matters. The governing board is fully committed to diversity within the SNB and to continue to strive in this direction also beyond gender diversity. We have clearly reiterated unambiguously that we will not tolerate any form of bullying, discrimination, or sexism within our institution. Now, this voice from the top needs to trickle down to the bottom of the institution. And this is where internal processes play a crucial role. This is why, as I mentioned, we are in the midst of reviewing our internal processes with a particular focus on some of these really crucial ones, like the ability to report misconduct. Shamsiah, you mentioned about it, and it was very interesting. So reporting misconduct is very important, but also the processes related to hiring and promoting and salary setting are very important. Seeking external validation and certification will also be an important step in this direction, as well as tracking hard data over time. Finally, I mentioned it, creating a diversity-friendly environment is important, and in order to attract really a diverse staff. Vacancies are all advertised today on an 80 to 100% basis at the minimum, and in the gender-neutral tone. We are reviewing also our work-life balance measures as well as diversity measures. What is important to us is that all of our programs are geared to all staff, irrespective men and women, and also irrespective of rank and their functions. And finally, I will say diversity is about inclusiveness. It is ultimately about what Shamsiah and Claudia mentioned. It is about diversity of thought. Diversity is not an end to itself. In fact, diversity should not come at the expense of achieving our ambition to attract the best staff and to create the best team. We believe diversity, on the contrary, is a tool to help us achieve this ambition. And this is why ultimately diversity is about inclusiveness. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andréa, and special thanks for sharing your story and your experiences from what you call the wake-up call regarding bullying and the likes. It sounds like you handle it in a very thorough way. I think also that part-time trap, as you mentioned, it is something that many societies and many women are struggling with. So let's then start to get into some of the discussion issues. You had already pointed out, which is a very timely issue, namely the post-pandemic society, post-pandemic workplace. It might be early days to discuss it perhaps, but the discussion is already in full going all over the world. Our office lives and the way we used to work got really thrown in the air, and there's a lot of work and thinking going on around, should we go back to the classic office, 9-to-5 work, 5 days a week? And I think it's probably fair to say that all management teams across most workplaces, not only central banks, obviously, but all workplaces, are sort of anxiously checking what are their competitors doing and offers their staffs and peers in general. So sort of two questions for you. What do you think the pandemic has caused for females in general in society, but in this case more narrowed down to central bank staff members? And instead of just sort of ending up with a new model for workplace by more or less by coincidence, if we really want to sort of take the helm here and deliberately design our future workplaces in order to support a diversified workplace, what should we keep in mind as we do these changes? So Claudia, would you like to start, and then followed by Shamsiah, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's important to put that question into the perspective of what we've just been saying, and I would like to pick up this term, the part-time trap. So why is it that women are falling into predominantly women are falling into the part-time trap? I think that has a lot to do with the expectation of society or the women themselves. It doesn't really matter that women typically take care, they have a higher workload in terms of taking care of children, taking care of the elderly. I think that kind of makes women often more inclined to choose positions or work arrangements that are more flexible. And so that maybe it's not the preference to do part-time work, but to have more flexibility. So I think that's important when we look at the effects from the pandemic and what's likely to stay. So certainly, I mean, we've made a big technological leap. So I don't know whether 2 years ago we all knew how to use WebEx. I certainly didn't, and now we do it regularly. So we work more from home, we have more flexibility. We also notice that we don't necessarily always need in-person meetings. I think it's actually to some extent easier to just quickly coordinate with staff and bring groups together, which would otherwise be more difficult to do. So I think there's a lot of benefits, and I think they can come to the benefit in particular of women, but I think it's also always important to consider that there's also many men who appreciate this flexibility and also want to do more of the family work, as I've been describing it. So that's certainly a very positive effect of the pandemic, and we have to make sure in a very clever way that we maintain this momentum of working differently and using that flexibility. The same goes to travel. So I very often hear when I talk to women, but also to men, about leadership positions, and in particular in the business that many of us are in, doing international work. They're very hesitant because they say, well, there's a lot of travel involved, and what does it mean for my family life? So, and I think we've certainly moved to a situation now with almost no travel, which is not optimal, and we have to find the right optimum when we come back. So, but there's also downsides, as we all know. So if we don't have in-person meetings, there's less interaction, this informal interaction that's really important to create new ideas and to make new contacts. So I think the bottom line for me is going forward, yes, we've learned a lot of new things. We were forced to learn a lot of new things. And we have to make sure that we use these new tools in a very clever way. And that again brings me to my what I said at the beginning. I think we need to really evaluate these new policies, these new tools. So we all have to decide when we come back after the summer break how to deal with working from home. How much travel do we want to do? How do we want to organize group meetings? And I think we have to very carefully assess what works, what helps women, others to use this flexibility, but also what are the potential negative side effects, that we have less interaction, less networking activity, which I use with a positive connotation now. So networking can have negative implications, but it can also be very positive because it brings you into a group. So that would be my bottom line. And again, I think we as central banks, because we use so much data day in, day out, I think we can do a lot to also have a good knowledge base to take these decisions.
Thank you. Shamsiah?
Well, no doubt lockdowns and other public health measures have curtailed access to schools, babysitters, childcare centers, or assisted care for the elderly. And this has caused much stress, especially to women. And when we reach out to the women in the bank, they indicate that they are more stressed and discouraged since the pandemic, as they have to assume the lion's share of childcare and household chores while juggling remote working. So women's well-being have been impacted across a range of areas, from mental health to job satisfaction. And this is a global phenomenon. I read a McKinsey report that says that mothers are more than 3 times likely compared to fathers to meet the majority of the demands for housework and caregiving during the pandemic. And a Boston Consulting Group survey also revealed that women spend 15 hours more each week than men on domestic chores. And as a result, half of the women said their work had suffered because of it. Well, you can't get additional hours in a day. So these chores will come at the expense of sleep and overall well-being of an exhausted mother. So well-being, including mental health, more critical now when everyone, including women, whether they have families or not, face burnout, stress, and isolation. So it's very important for us in the bank here to have outlets for the staff to share common struggles or seek counseling assistance in a safe, confidential, and assured environment. And among the bank senior officers, we also try to regularly discuss and reinforce the message for supervisors to respect people's time with the blurring of boundaries in the current enforced remote working conditions.
Yeah, my personal fear is that a lot of women with small children at home work from home to a large extent, and the guys are at the office making the career. That is not an optimal way of making the best conclusions from all the new digital gadgets that we have learned to use. Claudia, please. Post-pandemic experiences.
Okay, so I'll pick it up. What I would say is very much in line with what Claudia said, and keep it in mind, it's against the context that for women in Switzerland, the part-time trap is really a big challenge. It's a reality that is there. And so from that perspective, yes, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to really understand the impact of the pandemic also in Switzerland. And it's interesting because one of the most important tools that we've used through the crisis was the part-time work that been offered to companies that were losing business activity. But we don't yet have all the data also to make differential assessment between women and men and how that has fared. But in my view, there is a really important silver lining. We as central bank have really learned to what extent remote working or generally flexible working works, and even at scale, and even in areas we never thought it would be possible. I'm thinking about trading, asset management. I mean, it's quite remarkable what we've been able to do in a very different setup that we ever thought would be possible. So in my view, there is a silver lining if we can make this if we can change the mindset towards greater flexibility. But this, I agree with you, Cecilia, this greater flexibility must be used by all. It cannot just be used by a group of people, it must be used by all. And in this case, we can really hopefully help reduce the part-time penalty that there is. Because Claudia mentioned it, the in-person meetings might become less important and more based on what are the results, what are you bringing? And this could really make it easier for women to overcome some of the barriers they've been facing because of the part-time trap.
Let's broaden the horizon a bit. We've been talking about our jobs as managers at central banks, but if you think about how much can one's institution actually change? Well, in this case, we want to increase the share of female staff members and also in senior management positions. And how much of this strive to more diversification is actually dependent on more general policy in society. I'm thinking about legislation for working mothers, economic incentives for families to strive for 2 incomes rather than 1, subsidized daycare on a large scale, such as we have in Sweden, after school activities, etc. How much do you think this is that playing the bigger role, you think, to make these changes? Or do you think one institution, in this case we're talking central banks, can actually make most of these changes themselves? Claudia, would you like to start again?
Yes, I would like to start again, but the question you're asking is a tough one, because I always try to answer based on what evidence do we have, and disentangling exactly what is the role of overall institutions and individual preferences is hard. So, and we've also heard, it's interesting to hear across around this table, this virtual table, how different our, and that has a lot to do with preferences in society, with institutions that have been shaped over. Oops,
I think we lost you on screen now, Claudia, but I think we can still hear you. So if you just turn off the camera, I think you can carry on. Try it, please. Okay, I see you now.
I think I lost you. Should I continue? I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, so what I was saying is that all what we've heard is a lot to do with kind of deep societal preferences that are also shaping institutions. So it's hard to really assign numbers to the different aspects. But again, let me read a quote by Claudia Goldin, because I think that says a lot about this flexibility. I think this is kind of what we've all been saying, that flexibility is important. And she says, well, we need more flexibility, which doesn't necessarily have to involve government intervention, and not necessarily to make men more responsible at home, although that's her words, that wouldn't hurt. But it must involve changes in the labor market, especially how jobs are structured and remunerated, to enhance temporal flexibility. So, and I think that gives you kind of in a nutshell also what we've been saying, that there's a lot that can be done through overall general legislation. But I think we also have to go through our own procedures, the way we operate, and see whether we provide that flexibility. And sometimes this flexibility means that you have to tell your employees that, yes, it's okay if you have an important business, family business to attend to quickly during the day, you can do that. So, I mean, if we signal that flexibility, and that's what we can all do internally, then I think this is helping a lot. So in the end, I think it's the combination, but we shouldn't lay back and say, well, this is all for federal legislators to take care of. I think we also have our own duties to take care of. Thank you, and apologies for kind of dropping out.
It happens to us all, no worries. Shamsiah, any thoughts about the need for general policy?
Well, again, for us, when we do a deep dive on this issue, it goes back to this issue about the disproportionate burden of family care that the women face, which is the biggest challenge that the women face. And the family responsibilities will likely be more pronounced during the stage where women are being considered for larger and more senior roles. That is around when they have about 10 to 15 years of work experience, around 35 to 45 years. So this professional cycle is completely at odds with the biological clock and societal expectations. So, like I said, at Banagara, we are trying very hard to stem this issue by rolling out measures like flexible work arrangements and supportive childcare. But going further, we will need to also consider what else we can do to close any leaks in a female talent pipeline, especially in the senior roles. And this may include perhaps to establish more systematic mentoring groups and networks for female leaders to support one another. We find that this is a good way for younger women at critical points in their work and life journey to connect and get advice from women leaders and other role models within the bank.
And Claudia, general policy development in Switzerland and the role for that to make your life at the Swiss National Bank a bit easier. Any thoughts?
So clearly, framework conditions do matter. Childcare, the cost of childcare, if you look at international comparison, is relatively costly. I think cultural norms fundamentally make a difference. And one statistics I have on this is if I look at the difference across the region, and for instance, the French-speaking part of Switzerland, fewer women then tend to do part-time than, for instance, in the German part of Switzerland. So those are all things we have to take for granted. So this is not something where the SNB can make a difference. I think where the SNB can make a difference is what you mentioned is the elephant in the room, is addressing some issues where we can just do the best we can to support our staff and bringing the staff. So there are issues like flexibility is a very important one. And that will help. It is, we talked about it earlier, it's addressing unconscious bias, which can have an impact on how the professional potential of women is assessed or the performance. And depending on how it's assessed, it can be very taxing for women. So, and that would also help them, they have, Claudia, I liked it the way you talked about their personal preferences. Can we tilt these preferences? They do face a trade-off between the family responsibilities and the career? Can we make it really fun for them? Can we make it sure that they want to face the trade-off and that it's rewarding for them to do that? So all of these things we are working on, and I think there are things that do make a difference to have. That can have a difference. And this is why for us an important step was also to make sure our vacancies are now all advertised as 80 to at least 80%, 80 to 100%. So that also opens up, it signals it opens up way. And then to look into new job sharing models, those can also be very helpful. So I think all of these things are steps in the right directions.
Okay, you almost ran ahead of me there. I like that when you mentioned that I said something about elephant in the room, because I would like us now to turn to something which I find interesting. What diversification about the efforts to bring in more women into senior positions in central banking means to men. So I think everybody, can agree that we strive for excellence, getting the right people in the right places, creating the best quality, etc. But if enough men in a workplace believes that their particular workplace affects their individual chances to climb the career ladder, that is badly affected by the fact that the workplace is promoting diversification gender policy, and that these men therefore decides to leave for another workplace that might have less ambitions in diversification policy and therefore make it easier to climb a ladder. Is there a problem here? And if it is a problem, is there any sort of solution to it? Now, this is tricky, so I'm going to just leave the question open, and the person who would like to start, raise a hand, please. Shamsiah.
Cecilia.
Thank you.
All right. Mandatory quotas, in my mind, are double-edged swords, and its application should very much be context dependent. And I personally would relegate that as a last resort, with greater preference to strengthen the talent pipeline and supportive structures. One may start with the best of intentions, and over time, we may find that the positive discrimination for women evolve into something that is entrenched in societies in ways that we have not intended. And in these cases, then yes, men who feel unfairly treated may then decide to leave. And I don't think we want women who have risen into positions of power and responsibility to feel that they are there only because they are filling up the quota for the gender. And rightly so, you have posed this question. So if that's the case, are there any solutions to it? So I suppose it comes down to how the diversification policy is calibrated. If the policy only targets numerical equality, like 50-50 gender composition, this could result in more qualified men being bypassed just to fill the quota. So the policy should not just try and address the outcome, but rather focus on equity. That is recognizing that women have different challenges to men, and allocate the resources necessary to level the playing field and give them an equal chance to develop and grow. And whether someone ultimately succeeds should still be based on mainly on merit rather than quotas. So in our case, the policy for respect for diversity, merit, and transparency works best to elevate concerns across genders. And where the balance needs conscious policies to tip the scale, bring men into the conversation and in the design of the diversification policy. Many men have daughters too, and they believe in setting an equitable future for all. So set targets that focus on outcomes of merit and transparency, and not so much on gender KPIs.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Claudia,
Cecilia.
you raised your hand.
Yes, and I fully agree with what has just been said. I think it also has a bit to do with what do we think a career is. I mean, is it the traditional career where you just move up the ladder and then, I don't know, close to retirement, you have the top position, or do we also see some more flexibility there? Do we also appreciate other roles you can have in an organization? So, but I think this is a broader issue. But coming to the question, so do the qualified men leave if we do? If we too much strive to achieve certain targets towards female leadership or employment shares? And actually, I mean, I do hear younger colleagues, male colleagues, joking about it and say, "Well, we don't really have to. What can we do? We're only going to promote women." And I don't think it's always that serious, but I think this is something we have to bear in mind. So it's certainly, I mean, if we want to achieve diversity, it shouldn't be they against us, but it should really be about working at equal levels in a team. And I think that's where, again, the general rules in a society matter. So, I mean, the assumption in your question is that there are places like central banks where we want to encourage more gender diversity, and it's not the case in other places of society. So I think you need a general framework which generally says we want to promote diversity, and so I think this is also helping that cause. And again, I think we have to very carefully look at the policies we implement, just in line with what has been said earlier, that they not just target women, but that they also are aware of other unconscious biases we can have in our organization. So any male employee that departs, that has a difference in his or her behavior from traditional role models can also be discriminated, but it's maybe less easy to detect than just talking about men versus women. So we have to make sure that everybody gets a chance to find his or her own career path and employment path, and we have to also look at our policies in that regard.
And we're going to let the audience in for asking questions soon. But Andréa, what more women in central banking means for men. What's your view on this subject?
Well, it's interesting because we've had this, I mentioned a wake-up call, so there's been quite a bit of discussion around it. And the one thing I want to put in here is we have formidable men. They want to be part of the discussion. The question is to be clear about what we're trying to achieve here. And I think it is about diversity of thought. And this is helping us to solve complex problem making. It is about making the questions even more stimulating. And also the other thing, as I mentioned it, we have very low turnover. So we have a very steep pyramid. So I think it's also about turning around and thinking what is the expectation and how do we make the work environment stimulating, interesting, fulfilling? And I think these are the really interesting discussion, and diversity is clearly has to be part of it.
Okay, so I have, let me see, Benoit Morjon at the BIS. You have the floor, please.
Food for thought. Let me ask the panelists about blind spots, preferences, and in particular, role models. And so one thing that we know from research, for instance, on what we are given as societies, for instance, from Hollywood, is that if you try to count after you finish watching a movie, you try you think of the movie and then was it the case that in the movie there were at some point two women talking to one another, two characters of the movie, and they were talking about something else than a man. And actually, if you do this, I mean, you will realize that I think the percentage of movies which are showing women in basically acting role, making decision, influencing what's going on in the story, and so on and so forth. It's a very small proportion. I don't remember whether it's 5% or 10%, but it's really, really, really small. So I wonder whether you have, as part of your policies to promote diversity in central banks, also have part of the strategies that you should be in the general media to basically show to students who are thinking about what to do, what type of career, demonstrate that yes, when you are in the central bank, what you do as a central banker, and the four of you as central bankers, is very important for society. It's very useful for society. And that's part of the strategy to influence also the pipeline. Is it something which is that you have thought of, and is there something that you are doing in this direction so that we see a higher proportion of people who would take you as role models to then try to become central bankers themselves?
Thank you, Benoit. No, Hollywood has never been the forefront for women, in my view. And there's a special label now if you want to look at the movies that are the 5% or the less than 5% that are actually making women looking slightly executive in their behaviors. Okay, blind spots, preferences, the importance of role models. Anyone in the panel would like to take on that issues? Raise your hand, I can see you. Is role models important, Shamsiah? It's a stupid question.
Yeah, it does. It does play a role in terms of enticing more women to look at central banking in the area of finance economics is something that they may want to look into. Yes, we do outreach to universities, but unfortunately, for me personally, the last few years is not something that I was able to do. It's something that I've done in the past because of the pandemic and the demands on our time currently. But yes, I do agree that having role models can aspire and inspire more women to think of starting a career in central banking.
Okay, next speaker, Caroline Rogers, head of the Basel Committee, please.
Thanks. First of all, thanks to all four of you for being on the panel today, but more importantly, for being role models. Claudia, you said something in your opening remarks I want to come back to. It was in passing, but you said one of the things the Bundesbank is trying to do is change the nature of competition. And so I'm hoping you could elaborate on that a bit more, and if it's tied in particular to how you've changed your performance evaluation systems, I'd be really interested to hear about that, and also from the others on the panel. And then on this dilemma around flexibility and taking advantage of the flexibility we've learned that we can work with over this last year. One of the debates we're having is, do you need to mandate a minimum amount of work from home or flexibility in order to preserve that level playing field? I think you touched on this earlier, but how do we prevent this the inequity that would come from women choosing to use the flexibility and stay home, men choosing to come into the office, and that ultimately affecting career paths? I'd be really interested to hear from you on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Caroline. I'll take one more question, and then please raise your hand. But Claudia, you were addressed, so you will get the floor first. But I have next speaker is Taboada Bibiana. Hope I got that right. Central Bank of Colombia, please.
Hi, thank you very much, Cecilia, for having this interesting conversation and all the panelists here. So I'm Bibiana Taboada. I'm a member of the board here at the Central Bank, Banco de la República in Colombia. And we've talked a lot about how to promote and how to have women in central banking, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the advantages of having women in central banking. So what is it about women that it's important for central banking? So is it social sensitivity? Is it the level of risk aversion? Is it the analytical capacity? Probably a little bit of all of that. But I wanted to know what your thoughts on specifically, what is it that has women value added in managing reserves, in taking decisions related to the economy and the organizational aspect of central banks? Where do you see that women have value added? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taboada. Claudia first, and then feel free to raise hands. So Claudia.
Yes, thank you. Then thanks, Caroline, for a great question on this nature of competition. So, I mean, to start with the concrete question you had, so did we actually change our performance criteria for job assessments? No, we haven't done that. So that's not, I mean, that would be a bigger, I think, a task, because we're in obviously the public sector in Germany, so we can't easily change that, and it would also be very, we would have to weigh very carefully whether changes are useful or not. So what we did is something more kind of informal, if you want. So for example, well, informal in the sense that it's not about the performance criteria, but formal in the sense that these are requirements we have when we do job selection. So for instance, we have selection panels where women have to be presented, and that changes a lot. It changes a lot the interaction in the group and the discussions about the job applicant. I think also it makes women more inclined to apply, but this is just my perception. I don't have hard evidence on that. There's also very interesting work, experimental work, looking in particular at this nature of competition. How can you change it? And it also shows that if you have well-specified quotas, targets, then women are more encouraged to apply. So there's these changes you can make, and you can look at also the evidence that is there, and that does have an impact. But I think we also always, whenever we make these changes, we also have to assess whether they're actually successful or not, or whether they discourage other persons in the among the employees. And maybe just one quick remark on this question from the colleague from Colombia. I think obviously, I mean, what's the value added of women in our organizations? I mean, it's pretty clear in the many areas where women are already present. I think it also, women have value added to bring to the table in areas which are very often male-dominated. Maybe we come to the issue about men versus women in economics, and I think our economic analysis can also, we have very interesting, different, diverse viewpoints that people can bring to the table, which are often not really appreciated in economics. But maybe that's a broader question. But I think it's very relevant for us as central banks.
Okay, Andréa, please.
I think it's a great question what women can bring, and there's a lot that is being said, but I find women bring more women bring normality as something. In my career, there's been role models, but that they have played less of a role than just all the other women around me doing the same thing, facing the same challenges, going through the same routine, bringing children to daycare, running to daycare, that made it normal. And this normality makes many other things just lighter, because you figure you're just doing what you think you should be doing. And I think that's why there is a minimum number. I mean, I'm not talking quota here, but there is something about a number, enough women. And if we reach there, I think a lot just brings its own dynamic.
I can really support that statement. Both my parents were managers when I grew up, but I particularly remember how fun my mum thought it was. It seemed like it was energizing her a lot, and I got to hang out with her sometimes at the office and see her at play, and it energized her, and I was an inspiration to me. And I thought, if we can have that much fun at work, I want to do it too. So role models are hugely important, at least it was for me. Okay, I have Elisa Newby at the Bank of England, please. Elisa, sorry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the fantastic panel. It's been really interesting hour and a half. I just wanting to make a question about practical steps you might have taken in your central banks. And these steps, they concern everyday office practices, these sort of small things that are deep in our culture and that I also believe matters more than fine equal opportunities policies. And I just think it's crucial to ensure that both women and men can achieve work-life balance on everyday basis. And these practices, here I refer to say to discourage business meetings that start late in the afternoon, so practices that reduce presenteeism. And here I mean that people just spend time in the office without daring to leave home before their managers or so. So time is a scarce resource to everybody, and I know from practice that it does make a huge difference to family life, especially with small children, if the actual length of the workday is 8 hours than 10 to 12 hours. So just wanted to hear if you have taken these kind of practical steps to support work and life balance. Thank you.
I think, Elisa, that also men are gaining from a structured workplace. I don't think anyone benefits in the long run from having a life where work sort of flows over all boundaries. Well, all three of you had touched upon many of the sort of guidelines and way of thinking at your institutions. I might throw in a little bit of thinking from the Riksbank, and please raise your hand if you want to add further on this. But our personal view, our view at the Riksbank is that what gets measured gets done. Striving always for 50% is probably not very useful, but certainly think about the sort of 60-40 bracket it makes sense. And we actually sitting right now at 53% women in if you take all the managerial positions, management positions at the Riksbank. So we have to be careful not to get the men in too much of a minority going forward, but not be strict on sort of every level, every group, but as a whole, and keep an open mind about that is hugely important. I got Carolyn Rogers raised her hands again. So Carolyn, please.
I was trying to lower my hand, Celia, but if I have the floor, I want to come back to the question I asked about this dilemma around balancing flexibility without damaging equity. This idea that if we let people choose how often they want to take advantage of flexibility and work from home, we may end up with a gender divide that will exacerbate equality. I'm curious what the panel members think of that and how you might solve it.
I will let the panel get in on that question. I would first give the floor to Mr. Carstens, please.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, and thank you very much to all four of you for your very clear and enlightening comments. You are all in a leadership position in your own institution, and precisely because of the reasons you said that, at the end of the day, diversity is important because it makes us all better. It should be an institutional goal. Now, of course, it is important to rally the vast majority of employees in the institution towards to embrace this goal. Internal communication is very, very important, and one example is to address, for example, what you called, Cecilia, the elephant in the room. So what insights do you have in terms of how to address the issue of communication from the vantage point that all of you are in a leadership position, and I'm sure that all of you have made major efforts towards improving everything around these goals?
Okay, so we have two interesting questions. First, last week we heard from Augustine and from Caroline this issue of to what extent should we as employers regulate the existence of homework, because I think that is the essence of Caroline's question. Is it should be completely freely or should it be more regulated? Shamsiah, would you like to start?
Okay, I'll take on both questions. On the work arrangements about trusting the employees and not giving any undue misperception about someone coming to the office as much more hardworking. For us, definitely moving forward post the COVID, we will adopt a hybrid model where there will be requirements for our staff to come to the office for maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week, something that we have not figured out yet, because at the end of the day human connection is still important. We can't, especially for the new hires. One of the challenges that I faced during this last 1 year is we have new hires coming to the bank, joining us, and they really feel displaced because they don't get to see their colleagues. They don't even get to go to the office to see the work environment. So everything is very remote. So you lose that human connection, and you need this and you need this in order for you to develop esprit de corps, and for you to have closer collaboration. So that's where Augustine's questions comes in handy, because if once you are in this hybrid model, making sure that there is parity and having internal communication is going to be very, very important. For us, I think I've done more town halls this 1 year compared to the last 5 years, because the need to keep the staff engaged, and mental well-being is something that we cannot take lightly. It is something that, for us, we find that more and more staff are finding difficult because there is that blurring of line between, your personal time and the work time. And, having continuous engagement and communication in our senior officer meeting that we hold every fortnight. We make it a point in our agenda to talk about, okay, how is it that we have engaged our staff? Are there any issues? Are there areas that we need them to improve? Just a few days ago, I had a town hall. I'm trying to understanding, the challenges that our staff have operating in this very unique environment. Is, again, to see, okay, there are things that we can do better. What are the current or cultural beliefs that we ought to be embracing in order for us to be able to meet the challenges ahead. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I do agree it's not something that is going to be easy, but that's the new way of working moving forward, whether we like it or not. So we need then to put our heads together as to see how best to make it work and for the staff to continue to flourish under this environment.
Claudia or Andréa, any thoughts on these issues?
Well, very briefly, if I may, so also to Augustin's question about the internal communication, I fully agree that the town halls are important. Then also the new technology, I think, makes it easier for us to organize. So I think that's a clear benefit, and we also get a lot of support from staff for town halls, for informal communication. So it needs this communication from the top, from the leadership, that this is what we want, and we want this diversity, all the things we've talked about. But I think it's also the kind of the day-to-day communication that's important. So really make sure how you behave and how you communicate on certain requests, whether there can be more flexibility, to be open and to explain that, yes, we give this flexibility. We think that output is important. So if you need a little bit more flexibility, we can give that. So it's a give and take, and it's really also the kind of routine everyday communication that is my feeling that matters a lot.
Andréa?
Add something more general and mix it up with the lessons lessons to be learned from the pandemic. I think, Augustin, the point is communication is absolutely key, and the most fascinating thing for me is communication is evolving, and the skills that are needed to do a right kind of communication may be changing. I think there are really lessons to be drawn first. We need to do more work to understand what do we want to keep from the new world, the hybrid world? What do we want to bring back from the old world? For instance, communication skills used to be a lot at the SME was in-person communication skills. That's where you had to be really strong. Now, a lot of managers have to have much better virtual communication skills. That may require more listening skills. It may require different types of discussion. And I think this is an area. So before going to answering the very first question that was raised, is like, should we regulate the new normal? I think we need to do more work to really understand what is changing. What do we want to keep, and what is it that we want to bring back or retain, and how we can do that?
It's possible, I think, that we will not find a sort of any kind of optimal solution when it comes to this the first day one, but I would certainly say that I think we as managers need to be clear and firm on the level of flexibility here. We don't want to end up in sort of the ditches where we are preserving structures that we don't want to preserve. We have time for one more question, and I'm giving it to my fellow to my panelists here. In order to climb ranks, you have to expand your skill sets and your sort of competence in various ways, pushing your personal boundaries. And in order to do that, you need to either find or be offered challenges of different kinds. what is your impression here? Does men on average get more of these chances to challenge themselves and therefore improve their skill sets and therefore become more attractive for promotions? Or is that not the case? And do you have any sort of, based on the fact that you've all been very successful, your personal advice to young women in central banking or thinking about going into central banking, how to think around the fact that they need to expand their skill sets to be able to climb ranks? Who would like to start with this one? And you have to be quick because we're running out of time. So Claudia, you're quick.
So I can be very quick. So do men get more chances? No, I think, in particular, in the institutions where we have these targets, objectives, I think women are very often asked, maybe not for the leadership positions, but to also take on project work. So I think this is half and half, just representing the share. So advice to women, try. Give it a try, and you can't make a mistake. So it's, things will work out, and there's usually sufficient support. So don't be shy. I think sometimes maybe women think this, again, another stereotype, and maybe think twice, and it's useful to think twice and sleep a night over it. But then give it a try, and if you get these offers, you will succeed.
Andréa?
Love it, try. I think that's also what I would say. I've been told, you'll never make it, and you need to try. You need to go for it and find support around the way. The other thing is, I do think networking plays an important role as you move up, and that there, I think, depending on what the constellation in which you are, you need, as women, you need to push yourself to network. First of all, beyond your direct expertise, I think that's very important. Broaden your horizon. Networking is a great way to do it. And this is something that may come more natural. It's not that it comes more naturally to men, it's just a setup. If you have an environment where there are more men, you don't think about it. As a woman, you do have to do sometimes the first step. And there I come back to what Claudia said, just do it, just try.
And Shamsiah.
I totally agree with what Andréa and Claudia have said. And my other advice is, always work in a team, because in a lot of the issues and the policies that central banks are involved in, it more often than not, a collaboration is very important for us to prevent silo thinking and things like that. And that's an area I think women has an advantage over men. We have more empathy. We are able, work with a much more diverse set of colleagues. And the other thing that my advice is always have a support system, either in your family or at the workplace, for you to be able to tap on whenever you think that there are challenges that your colleagues or the workplace is not able to address for you.
I'll throw in a couple of thoughts myself on this. I think challenge yourself. If you can't find the challenges in your workplace, find them yourself. Find a support team is excellent. Find a professional network, other women and men for that matter, that inspires you and challenge you. And make sure that the workplace is you find it fun and interesting and fascinating to work. That brings an element of passion into the work, and that usually makes it much better and much more fun. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Andréa, and thank you, Shamsiah, for a very fascinating hour and a half. It felt like 20 minutes. And let me just also say my admiration and respect for the board and for the management of the BIS for its way it's choose to tackle and address many of the very important questions for the future. I know the BIS as an institution is going 90 years and a bit, but my impression is that by every year its heart is getting younger and younger. So thank you very much from Stockholm, and over to you, Augustin.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you very much, Claudia, Shamsiah, Andréa. Thank you on behalf of the BIS, and I'm sure I can speak in the name of all the central banking community. What we try to do in this seminar is precisely to bring authoritative speakers to address challenges, central challenges that the central banks are facing. And needless to say, the one that you addressed is a major challenge. And I got a lot out of this conversation, and I'm sure that the rest of my colleagues would have done exactly the same. So we're very, very appreciative of your effort and your energy in addressing this topic. So with this, we conclude this panel. And I want just to remind you that the 2:15 Basel time, we will start the presentation by Professor Atif Mian. So thank you very much. Best of luck and good health to everybody.